Greetings, friends. David Marks here with an Adobe Photoshop Lightroom Classic troubleshooting video. As you know, I love this program, but let's face it, mastering Lightroom Classic is not easy, and it can be super frustrating when our tools, panels, or features suddenly go missing. Now, there are so many ways that things can go wrong in Lightroom that I have divided up the hunt for missing tools and features into two separate video tutorials. In this video, I'm going to cover the most common frustrations that I see inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic's Develop module only. If there are library module tools or features that you are missing, then the first video in this series is the one for you. Without further ado, let me walk you through some of the most common missing tool scenarios that I see every day. First, I want to remind you that just like in the library module, you can open or close the right or left side panels in here. Fortunately, the tab or shift tab trick will bring all of our panels back. Next, I need to show that in the Develop module, we have the same ability to hide away some of the panes that we don't need with a right click. I'm going to right click here on the word Presets in the left-hand panel, and then a flyout menu will appear. Like the panel flyout that we saw back in the library module, you can check or uncheck anything that you want to show or hide away here. Things are a little different though when you right-click on one of the panes on the right-hand panel in the Develop module. If you right-click on the word Basic, for example, then a slightly different flyout menu will appear. In here, we now have the option to open up an additional menu where you can choose to show or hide any of the right-hand Develop module panes. If I click or unclick one of these when it has no check mark, it will disappear. I rarely use the calibration panel these days, so I'm going to take its check mark away to hide it. In addition, though, you also can drag these panes around if you want to arrange them in a different order. I appreciate that Adobe has finally given us this option, but after almost 11 years of daily Lightroom use, I've grown accustomed to the factory default settings, so I rarely use this feature. Anyway, now you know where this option lives, just in case one of your Develop panels go missing, or if they appear in some crazy order. To make these flyout menus appear, be sure that you are not trying to right-click on the top pane in any module. Don't try right-clicking on the word histogram or on the navigator at the very top left because nothing will happen. One more comment. Preset storage in Lightroom is a complicated topic. It's so complicated, in fact, that I have a complete tutorial elsewhere for those of you who are missing some or all of your developed presets. I'll include a link to that tutorial in my post just in case you need it. Now we've covered all of the most common frustrations, so let's dig a little deeper into some of the little stuff. One thing that occasionally throws off longtime Lightroom Classic users is when the controls here in the Develop module Basic panel are all different. By all different, I mean the choices in here like exposures, whites, blacks, shadows, highlights disappear. Watch what happens when I slide over to the next image. Do you see how this panel changes and tools like texture or dehaze are now missing? The reason that the Basic panel is all different now is because this old image is using a much older processing version. Sometimes a warning box will pop up when you open up an older image. That box pops up because the old software used different processing algorithms. If you don't see that process warning box though, or if you've dismissed it on purpose like I have, then you might notice this tiny little warning symbol right here beneath your image's histogram. Basically, this little lightning bolt thing is warning you that Lightroom is sticking with your old processing instructions until you tell it otherwise. If I click here though, then a box will pop up where I can hit Update. That changes the code that this image is using, and now all of the features that we're used to seeing reappear. To illustrate a more frequent frustration, let me change images. And now I'm going to show you all of the options that I have for this image when I click on the white balance dropdown. In here, I can pick things like daylight or cloudy or shade to change the white balance around. Likewise, let me point out the range of numbers here that we have beside the temperature slider. But when I slide over to the next image, notice how these numbers change. Now they're not in Kelvin units anymore. And if I click here in the white balance options, I only have 3 choices. those options like cloudy, shade, they've disappeared. And the reason this has happened is the difference in the processing options that Lightroom offers between a RAW and a JPEG file. The last image was a RAW file, which means it's more flexible, and things like the white balance have not been set by your camera. Regardless of file type though, there are a couple other places in the Develop module where things can get wonky. It's not super common, but sometimes we all get frustrated when we're working with the clone stamp or the healing brush tool. In here, that circle that you're seeing, that represents the size of my healing brush. When the brush is large, it's not hard to see it, and I can take out a dust spot like this one. The problem though is when I drag this brush size slider all the way down. If I drag this guy all the way to 0, then my cursor virtually disappears. Once you know what's wrong here, this one is easy to fix. Just drag the brush size slider back up to something more reasonable. But again, this one can really upset you if you don't know what you're looking for and if you have that right-hand panel hidden away. There are two common frustrations that I often see in my Lightroom workshops or private tutoring sessions when folks are trying to master the graduated filter, the radial filter, or the brush tool. I'm going to open up the graduated filter for this demo. With the graduated filter open, I'm going to set the exposure to like -1 or so. And then I'm going to drag out a gradient to make the sky darker. I have a series of in-depth tutorials elsewhere on all of the amazing things that we can do with the graduated filter, so I'm not going to reteach it at this point. Where folks often get frustrated though is when they accidentally change the show or hide options for the edit pin, that little dot in the middle and those 3 white lines, by accident. Down here, there's a choice on the toolbar that says Show Edit Pins. I usually keep it set to Always so that they're always visible. But if you accidentally set this one to Never, then those lines in that dot will disappear. Again, fine if you don't want to see those, but it's really frustrating when you can't figure out why they disappeared. In addition, there's a keyboard shortcut here that toggles the Hide or Show option for that edit pin. It's the letter H. And I see Lightroom users make this mistake all the time. Even really experienced photographers will drag out one gradient filter with the edit pin accidentally hit to Never, and then they'll think that nothing happened, and they'll drag out another gradient and another and another again and again and again. Since there's nothing on the screen right now to indicate that there are other graduated filters in place, you can accidentally create an awful mess. My advice is always keep this control set to Always. With it at Always, you can see that each different graduated filter has its own pin. One more quick one here. When you have a filter, like the graduated filter, or an adjustment brush tool layer in place, there are times when it helps to see the adjustment mask overlay. The adjustment mask overlay is the red wash that you're seeing over my image right now. The red in the mask overlay covers over the areas that this graduated filter is changing. As I move this filter around, that red overlay helps me see which parts of my image will be altered and which won't by this change. Now that's great, but there is an option in Lightroom to change the color of this overlay. The keyboard shortcut to change the color of the adjustment mask overlay requires 2 fingers. To change its color, hold the Shift key and press the letter O. Changing from red to green does me no harm. And sometimes that green overlay makes it easier to see where your changes are working. But the next 2 choices, the white or the black overlays, can really drive you nuts if they appear by accident or if you forgot how you turned them on. When you have the white adjustment mask active, it can be very hard to see where your filter is working or the changes that you're actually making right now. Watch the sky as I turn this graduated filter layer on and off. See, in this case, I'm actually telling it to make the sky darker, but with the white overlay turned on, it appears as if my sky is getting brighter, and that can really confuse you. And if you want to make your life really miserable, try setting the overlay to something like white, then hide the edit pin away, and then hide the toolbar as well. No, seriously, don't do any of those things, or you might end up accidentally going crazy. I'm going to set this back to the red overlay. Two more tips to show you, and then we can wrap up this painful tutorial. When I slide over to this image, do you see how all of my Develop module tools are grayed out? I can't do anything at all here in the Develop module to change the brightness or the color of this image, but that's a symptom of a much larger problem. The problem here is that this photo is now offline or missing, meaning that right now, Lightroom Classic has no idea where to find my original image. That's what this little triangle right here means. If this happens to you, then you need to help the program find the image that you originally imported before you can do anything else. I have a long tutorial elsewhere on this common Lightroom frustration, so I'm not going to solve this problem right now, but I need to point this one out because it continues to frustrate so many Lightroom Classic users. Finally, there is one last troubleshooting trick that you should know about. In dire cases, where nothing else seems to make things better, then there is a way to completely reset all of Adobe Photoshop Lightroom Classic's preferences. Completely resetting the preferences is not likely to cause you any harm, but I urge you to make sure that you have a robust backup of your Lightroom catalog and all of your images before you try this step. If you need to go to this extreme, and once you're convinced that you have robust, reliable backup, then quit or exit out of Lightroom. Next, find the icon for Lightroom Classic on your dock, desktop, or quick launch bar. If needed, you can find it in your Programs or Applications folder as well. This time, when you click on the icon, immediately jam down on the Shift, Alt, and Command keys on a Mac. That's the Shift, Alt, and Control keys for you PC folks. Hold all three of these keys down immediately after you click on this icon. If you execute this 3-button sequence fast enough, then a dialog box like this will appear. If nothing else has solved your troubles, and if you're sure that everything has been backed up, then resetting all the preferences might solve your super mysterious problems. I'm going to press the Start Normally button since nothing is wrong here today, but now you know the ultimate fallback if some feature is missing. Well, there you go. I know that this lesson was not a lot of fun, but hopefully these tips and tricks can save you from a host of endless frustration. If you found this video helpful, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a like or a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our next tutorial.